verify. This has been over a year in the work. I originally had proposed this as a accelerating change in medical education program from the AMA. It got rejected, so I was like, I'm going to do it anyway. So I built this course, and I'll describe some of the structure and the pedagogy and the different dimensions of it. But the fundamental reason we designed this is that medical students are already using tools like open evidence, all sorts of AI derivatives that are more directly related to medical science research. They're using these, but do they have the critical skills necessary to assess whether these outputs that they're getting in the clinical context are actually valuable or not? And I think we've even seen some discussion today about other schools trying to puzzle through this problem. How do we prepare students to be critical consumers of this? And since part of my role is also to develop our evidence-based medicine curriculums, one thing I definitely tried to do with this was to bring in the evergreen, the perennial tools of evidence-based medicine that we know are tried and true, that work really well with medical students, and to try to integrate those concepts into our teaching of AI. That way we're not just teaching them about the flavor of the week app or the technology that's going to go out of date in a year or 6 months. We're really teaching them tools and practices that they can use throughout their career that are never going to go away. So that's really the nature of both the gap and the response that we have. You can, by the way, feel free to scan. I know this is a little small, but feel free to scan. You can do this on the course website. But basically, we went through and we identified several themes. Some of this is based on our work in digital health from our previous Accelerating Change in Medical Education grant from AMA. When we were doing that, we definitely noticed that there were some key themes. One is what happens when physicians use digital technologies and digital health. So we thought that that was an equally interesting theme for addressing issues related to AI. So how are physicians using it? Number two is what happens when patients bring in information, right? That's going to change the whole game. If you think Dr. Google is already maybe annoying for you in your practice, Dr. GPT is going to be much more compelling and much more, and potentially more inaccurate, right? And we also wanted to really center the concept of equity and bias. The medical literature has a long legacy of racism, sexism, fat phobia, all sorts of different biases that, as a result of being used as the center of the training data, have carried over into AI. And if we're not critical about that, we can accidentally wind up reproducing inequity despite our best efforts because the underlying technologies themselves have inequitable components. So that's really fundamentally the kind of core themes. And we also wanted to have an overview of a non-technical overview of AI for folks because they have to understand. If you don't really understand what a token is, you don't really understand how all of these things can go wrong. But on the flip side, we're not training computer scientists here. They don't really care what a token is. They just need to know what it does and how it works. So fundamentally, we teach them to use evidence in a really structured format that begins with identifying a core problem of practice. One of my students who piloted it, they chose, they'd worked with an attending who wanted to create, a handout or some information related to post-surgical dermatological issues that might be related to anesthetics and issues related to anesthesia. And there's just not a lot of stuff out there because it's very rare, but he has seen it happen. So, for example, starting with a realistic problem practice like that, using AI to help them kind of work through this in a very consistent way, and building habits that will go with them beyond the length of the course. We have a number of, again, we focused on some core problems that occur again and again in AI. One is its fluency bias, its ability to trick us into thinking that it knows what it's talking about because it sounds convincing, but the reality is it's not, it doesn't think at all, right? It's merely a probability engine in some ways. What happens when patients bring AI, that is going to be a huge area of not just the AI itself, but patient communication. My ongoing example with this is from our digital health course. We talked with a gastroenterologist whose patient had their feces sequenced, and they used the microbiome data. They came in with this gigantic packet of microbiome data and said, okay, tell me what this all means. And he was like, well, this isn't clinically useful for me, right? So but he didn't shut the patient down. He treated them on their own. He said, why did you think this was necessary? Why did you go to all these lengths to get these data from me? And then they had a very productive talk about bloating and different pains that allowed him to get to a clinical treatment. So thinking about patient-brought AI and thinking about these equity risks are going to be really important. And our ultimate overall goals are teaching them verification skills, communication, confidence with patients, equity awareness as always, and safer use of AI in clinical care. So that's our long-term goal. We have 5 course modules that roughly align with those themes. The first is just general AI, what's going on in AI in clinical medicine these days. Number 2 is applying those core principles of EBM to AI. Number 3 is navigating patient-brought AI. There are some really interesting resources out there that we highlight. Mitigating bias in AI, and then finally looking at practical integrations of AI into evidence-based medicine. The course is structured, in addition to being inquiry-based, it has a capstone component to it, and each module has one piece of the capstone that you have to do. Winds up being quite a substantial amount of work, but we plan this to be a 2 to 4 week course, depending on whether you're a third year doing a 2-week elective, or a fourth year doing a 4-year elective, or residents who can do this at their leisure. But basically there's an AI-assisted clinical inquiry where it kind of structures and takes them through a very structured approach to using AI. They develop an evidence verification report where they go through and they, as we heard from Quinpac, right, you guys are having them do a verification of DOI numbers and things like that. In fact, this course, this course was designed with Claude. My undergraduate capstone student realized that Claude can write directly to Canvas courses. So I stopped having to copy and paste stuff and construct it myself. I could just say, make me a 5-unit course. But similarly, it included in it fake sources. I had to go through and verify each individual piece to make sure they're right. Module 3 involves creating a patient education handout for use for patients in a culturally and linguistically appropriate model. Then they review that with a mentor, a clinical faculty of some sort, who will then help them clarify and make sure that it matches against their clinical expertise. And finally, they reflect on this and develop a personal algorithm, which will help them do this process again and again, replicably and faster and more realistically in the future. Here's the basic process as well as we're outlining. They start with a clinical question, they prompt the AI tool, they log the provenance of all the claims, they break those outputs into claims in more detail. They verify it with their EBM practices, assessing, are these good sources, are they meaningful, are they real? Then they audit for bias and equity to make sure that they're not introducing any sort of risk to patients. Then they accept, modify, or reject those claims, and then they translate that into care and then back into creating more questions. So that's kind of generally how we would envision it. This is something not created by AI, though this actually, here's me and my bald head over here, but with my one of my mentors from UW, Dr. John Bransford, who worked with a lot of the folks like Bill Cottrell, who's here today at Vanderbilt. They developed this challenge, this inquiry cycle. So you start out with a big challenge at the beginning, and that challenge builds to asking people open-ended questions with their initial thoughts. So what do you already know about this question? That accesses prior knowledge. Then it presents them with multiple perspectives, lots of different resources and perspectives from different folks in different fields. And then it asks them, based on having watched this, how has your thinking changed from this phase to this phase? That cements their, number one, requires metacognition, number two, helps them to establish and concretize the changes in their thinking. The reason this is also incredibly important is if you ask someone at the end, did you know X, Y, or Z at the beginning? They'll be like, yeah, of course I did. But if you went back, what they would have said was actually very different. So this will help them come to their own conclusions about the relationships between different components of AI and EBM. And finally, they're going to share out. They're going to share one piece of their perspective and one additional new piece of research that they can include in the forums and back into the next module. The challenges themselves, this is inspired by John Bransford as well, take the form of a vignette with a real, in this case a realistic person, Dr. Maya Patel. And from each one, she goes through and faces issues directly related to this. So in the first one, she creates a note that winds up having fake citations in it. So now she has to go through the process of ferreting all those out and do that. That provides her with the motivation in the following ones to be more careful about how she's using it. And finally, at the end, she presents in the final vignette a really comprehensive presentation to her fellow residents about, and a vulnerable presentation where she says, this is what I got wrong and you should not make this mistake. So we have these as vignettes, and actually I've used a little system where I had Claude write the vignettes, then I used Google Gemini's API to turn the vignettes into voiceover text, because they have those really same ones used in Google Notebook LM that sound like they're out of NPR. So, but you can get it just as an MP3 file. Then I had ChatGPT make all of these pictures of Maya Patel in various action poses. They look a little bit sloppy in some places, but better than just using random stock art, right? And then I put them together into like a little PowerPoint, and then save it as an MP4 and embed it in there, so we have a nice little, it's not a full motion video, but it's got enough pictures along the way to help make it a little more concrete. We had 4 students try this already. They were generally very happy with it. What I think is more important at this phase, I'm a design-based research fan. That's kind of my doctoral work was in design-based research. So for me, it was as much that they liked it or whatever as what can you tell me about what's wrong with it so I can fix it, right? And the nice thing about using Claude as a co-author on this is we were able to do things like they said, I would really like to have a glossary of key terms. Done. Told Claude, make me a glossary, put it in. It went through the whole course and uniformly was able to do that. Somebody suggested having integrated prompting exercises. So I'd have like a version 1.0 of that in Claude. I just was able to put it together in a couple of hours. And then the worked example of the capstone project. I was like, that's amazing. I have no time to make that myself. So I fed the capstone back to Claude and I said, make it in this example. And I was able to go through and verify that it's in pretty good shape. So if you guys want a QR code, we have QR codes of this links to the vignette with Maya Patel. This is just module 1. But if you want to learn more about the course, you can go there. If you want to request a copy of the course, right now we can do it one of 2 ways. I can add you to the existing Canvas course and you can play around and see what the course is like. And then if you want to use it with your students, it is an IMSCC file, so I can just give it to you. It's about 50 megabytes. I can put it in Google Drive, and then you can load it into your Canvas course. And then we can do it. What I would love to do is partner with folks, and maybe if we can get an interinstitutional IRB to be able to study the outcomes from this. I think there's a really good academic medicine paper in this. Definitely, I think a MedEd portal submission, if anybody wants to test, because we could find out that we might need multiple versions of this, and we might need multiple approaches or something like that, and that would be a really productive thing. Also, as part of the course, there is a pre and post Artificial Intelligence and Evidence-Based Medicine Skills and Knowledge Survey. That's a 35-question, 7-scale thing that ChatGPT can make, but it produces this little spider diagram. So students complete it at the beginning and the end, but if you wanted to use it as a standalone for something to assess your faculty and like a faculty meeting or something like that, you could develop that as well. So if anybody wants to take a look at it, if my computer hasn't died, I would be happy to share it here. Any questions I can, or anything I can offer? Thank you so much.
First of all, amazing.
I'm sorry, my computer died.
Oh no.
It's,
What questions do you